And so, as we enter the international break, it is clear we are in the midst of the most volatile FPL season in memory. We thought the player pricing structure might make things more interesting this season, but we could not have been prepared for how explosive it would make the game, nor for the fear it would embed in managers. In game week 6, over 600,000 managers deployed the wild card, a figure much lower than expected, but one augmented by so many of those big name content creators who fed into each other's fears about going against the grain and ultimately ended up sharing the same pain. Their ardent followers, seeing so many of the big names converge to the similar strategy, they hopped on the bandwagon. However, they failed to realise that the wheels had a screw loose and their seasons were about to be derailed. So few managers backed Cole the goal for that game week 6 wildcard, then they all panicked, with almost 1 million managers bringing him in right before his toughest run of fixtures. 60,000 managers saw last season's second top scorer to do so, right before his easiest game of the season, and those foolish 60,000 saw an immediate loss of 10 points even before captaincies figured into the equation. Selling Saka before Southampton seems like a crazy move, but in this season of shifting sands, all of us are susceptible to panicking into some terrible decisions. For so many years, Tommy Template has protected us from true punishment, but now we simply cannot have the right team every week. Now we must all pick our poison and hope the bitter pill we swallow kills us slower than it does our rivals. 2/3 of FPL managers chose not to own last season's second highest scorer ahead of his easiest game of the season, and that is just madness to me. However, if they owned Cole the goal, they would have still come out ahead. If they fell into the trap of the big haul hokey cokey, then they've rightfully been punished. But maybe they had both Saka and Palmer. But then who have they sacrificed to get them? Young-Min Son, now with better fixtures than both? Alexander-Arnold, the best defensive asset available? Or maybe it's one of the two biggest names in the game, Mighty Mo and the Norse Force. You simply can't have them all. You should probably only have 2. Some are pushing for 3, but the sacrifices elsewhere mean a Mavididi over an Mbuemo, a Greaves over a Gabriel, or a Jimenez over a Havertz. In the short term, these moves can pay off. Welbeck has matched Watkins so far. James Justin is ahead of Robertson. Kovacic is level with Boyne and ahead of Son. But this is not a short-term game, and in chasing game weeks, you're sacrificing championships. Reactionaries do not win titles. Only long-term planning leads to sustained success. Oh, but Lord George, you panic bought Diaz for a hit. Oh, Lord George, you told us to get Savinho on our game week 6 wildcards. Aye, I did. I'm not immune to an ice-cold chill of fear coursing through my veins. I bought Diaz for a hit, and it's cost me 17 points in just 2 game weeks. As for Savinho, well, that remains to be seen. I know Black Boxers will have been smiling away at Savinho not playing a minute in game week 7, thinking it proved him right. However, I also advised to have Strand Larsen and Ike Nori as cover, and if you'd followed that advice, then having Savinho in your starting 11 would have been worth between 6 and 9 points in game week 7. Indeed, it was nice to see the Raptor take my advice to invest in the Wolves lads, and even nicer to see it immediately pay off for the lad. At least somebody knows I have the mind game for success in FPL. And while Black Boxers may think he's won the Savinho debate, not only is he wrong, the real winners are those who still have the wild card for that big game week 12 fixture swing. Until then though, those like me need to keep on fighting to stay in the mix, to position ourselves ready to pounce, foregoing optimal early game weeks for an optimal season. season. To do so takes some big calls, like those Game Week 6 wildcard Mavericks who defied Tommy Template and brought in Cole the Goal. Or the big call for me we spoke about last week, whether to sell Eze or Joao Pedro and who to bring in instead of him. Ultimately, Joao Pedro's long-term injury made that decision much simpler for me, enabling me to make the spicy selection of signing Jorgen Strand Larsen for the George Lords. And not only was Strand Larsen one of the few players I could actually afford to bring in, like I keep saying, in the long term, he is quite simply the best option to be your 8th choice attacker. And yes, I could have taken a hit to bring in Solanke just like everybody else, but instead I chose to lead the way and I indulged in some grand larceny, which meant I stole away with an extra 6 points. Not only that, but if Trenton and Wermo continued to bang, the Starboy went supernova and Big Chris Wood erected an 8-point flagpole right the way back up to 4th position in the world's greatest mini-league. After such a dismal showing last week, this week my lords came through, securing the 2nd highest total in the top 10 of the League of Gentlemen. And it could have been even better if only I'd had the cojones to back brilliant Bakayo with the captaincy. As it turned out, only one gentleman made that big balls call to entrust the Arsenal talisman, and it's fitting that it was the Townhead gunner himself, Joaquin Jeeves. In a game week when the entire rest of his team secured only 2 assists and 1 clean sheet, the Saka double up was enough to give Jeeves the top score in the entire League of Gentlemen. Those 64 points see Joaquin Jeeves all the way up to 13th, still 68 points off top spot, but in a much better position from which to attack. Joaquin Jeeves may be the manager of the week, but throughout the rest of the League of the Gentlemen, the stories keep being told. Terminator Triss ended his ultra differential challenge, then for some reason he left Nico Jackson and Mbuemo on the bench to start 5 defenders. Even so, his 62 points, bolstered by a bold triple Man United defence call, saw him finally rise from the foot of the table, overtaking both Metal Mark and the Master Chef, whose season looks burnt to a crisp and ready to be written off by Gordon Ramsay. Dodger Rogers missed the opening game week of the season, but yet even after starting in game week 2, he's found a way to climb up to 30th in the League of Gentlemen rankings. That being said, he also offered up another example of a wasted triple captaincy, with Palmer's 6 points not enough to classify the trip as a success. Finally hitting the comeback trail is Grinchy Go, who made no changes to his team last week, perhaps in a tantrum at his minimal exposure in last week's video, and yet he managed to climb 2 places to 28th. Of course, he did not take my advice to bring in the Wolves lads, so he only had Semenyo to come off his bench for 2 points, which limited how high he could climb. But at least, after 6 seasons, he finally has a substitute's bench. Of course, it's typical for the Grinch that just as he succumbs to the pressure to bring in Haaland, the Norse force blanks in back-to-back game weeks. However, you have to feel that decision will pay off in the game weeks to come. Another surprise struggler this season is the Butcher, Big Steve Allison, who famously won back-to-back silver medals a few seasons ago, but now finds himself down in 27th place. On paper, his squad looks strong, which makes you wonder why he's struggling so much. But when you look at his transfer history, the story is revealed. Not only did he waste a transfer switching Barco to Jamal Lewis in game week 2, he signed Madueke, Duran, Nico Jackson, Luis Diaz and Cole Palmer the game week after their big score, many of them for a hit. It's all too reactionary, which just goes to speak for the wider FPL community as a whole, with a fixture list and a player pricing structure that denies any real long-term template picks. People are panicking when the player they have underperforms compared to the one they could have had, and then they freak out and switch when what they needed was a little bit of faith. Just lost this game week after he first transferred Madueke in the game week after his first big haul. The butcher's given up and sold him right before another big haul. Not only that, he did it for a hit. Don't get me wrong, the butcher can still get back in the running, but how many of you are making the same mistakes? I know I've done it, and I'm certain most of you have done it at least once. And for us to have a chance of becoming this season's world number one, we all have to learn the lessons of these mistakes. And the Game Week 7 transfer choices are a major source of the volatility inside the League of Gentlemen's top 15 this game week. King Ding benched Lewis Hall to bring in Dwight McNeil for his guaranteed blank against Newcastle, and that was a decision which ultimately saw him fall from 4th to 12th rather than limiting the damage to just 8th. After a stunning performance last time out, the Kings struggled in Game Week 7, only managing to score 31 points, the second lowest in the entire top 26. The lowest scorer in that bracket was Iceman Newton, who sold Madueke's 10 points for Nkunku's 1, which means instead of being in 4th place, he finds himself sharing 8th with Hilo Hodgson, who took a hit to start 3-point Rodgers over 8-point Dean, a move that again cost him 4th spot. It could have been worse though. They could have been like the Dragon, who was one of 3 gentlemen in that 60,000 who sold Saka for Parma, missing this week's huge haul through fear of last week's. And indeed, in the entire top 23 of the division, only 2 managers made transfers that could be deemed as successful. Wildman Whitfield was one, switching the injured Van Heck to the 10-point Nathan Collins. But even that wasn't enough to stop him dropping to 5th spot, with Cole Palmer's assist his only other return in the entire game week. The only other manager to make a successful transfer was that handsome, charismatic, uncompromising, game-changing, uncontent creator who brought in Jorgen Strand Larsen and saw himself shoot right back up to 4th position. 500,000 places closer to the ultimate goal of world number 1 and hunting down those 3 gentlemen ahead of him. And the worst thing is, I should already be in 2nd spot, closing down the gap on the Gladiator, but I went and bottled the big balls call and captained Haaland over Saka. And that's on me. That's my fault, and you need to learn from that. And while those 2 gents ahead of me also rose in the table, I closed the gap on both of them. It may have only been a handful of points, but the gap to Ginger Ben closed thanks to my Chris Wood leaving his DCL in the mud, with the Everton man becoming another successful pocketing for Big Dan Burn. And what's interesting is the 9-point gap between us equates to almost 300,000 places in the overall rankings, which just goes to show how tight things still are. And if your overall ranking is getting you down, just remember that and just realise that one big game week will see you cut through the rest of the field like butter. And the man in 2nd place is John Go-Karting, suggesting that smooching top spot the other game week may not be the kiss of death for his season like it was a few years back in the 3rd FPL Nightmare book. And I'll be honest with you, like I always am, when he brought in Welbeck in game week 2, I thought this is not a serious player.
I love you, but you are not serious people.
However, 27 points in just 5 starts for Go-Karting ensures that Danny Welbeck has already played his part. And it's almost a shame for Go-Karting that he simply must sell Welbeck now, because in game week 8 he's up against Big Dan Burn, and we all know how that one's gonna turn out. However, as much as the 3 of us will celebrate climbing through the ranks, we all lost ground on the irrepressible Gladiator Glenn, who is adapting to the weight of expectancy and becoming ever stronger. Even though he left Welbeck's 8 points on the bench, he still smashed home the 3rd highest score of the game week and extended his lead on the top. Last week he sold Heung-min Son for James Maddison, and that decision bore fruit this week with a ripe 10 points from Spurs' apple of creation. And yet, once again, he got his captaincy all wrong. Last week, I showed you how if the Gladiator had got his captaincy right each week, he would be 72nd in the world. If you take that information and extend it to game week 7, and the Gladiator had captained Saka over Palmer, do you know where he'd be? He'd be 7th. Not 7th in the world's greatest mini-league. He'd be 7th in the entire world. If he'd both nailed his captaincy this week and started Farce and Welbeck over the two-men Liverpool bench, Robertson and Diaz, then Gladiator Glenn Morton would be 3rd in the entire world. And the two people that would have been ahead of him, they both bench boosted in game week 1. If the Gladiator had done all that and he'd bench boosted in game week 5, then Gladiator Glenn Morton would be at the apex of 10.5 million managers. With just a few minor tweaks to the exact same strategy and squad he's got, Gladiator Glenn Morton would be 8 points clear of the entire world. He's had the squad to do it every game week. He's just got a few minor details wrong. And so, because of those small margins, instead of ending game week 7 as the world #1, Gladiator Glenn Morton ends it in the doldrums of 9,019th place. And yet somehow, I think he'll be happy with that. And it's that satisfaction that will prove his ultimate downfall, because I'm coming for the Gladiator. I'm 4th in the world's greatest mini-league, and the 3 gents ahead of me have all used their wildcards. They can't deploy the optimum strategy of the game week 12 wildcard, and that's when I make my move, and that's when the season turns in my favour. Until then, I've just got to keep hanging in there, staying in the slipstream until it's time for me to overtake on the home straight. And until then, there is 4 game weeks of opportunity. 4 game weeks to gamble on those explosive short-term options before wildcarding into that optimum team that takes me clear. And you look at my team, and there's no major need for a transfer this week. But I'm going to let you in on a little secret. I'm going to tell you the master plan for that game week 9 fixture against Southampton. I'm going for a triple Man City attack. I've already got Haaland. I'm going to be swapping Saka for Foden. And that third option, well, you know who I want. You know how desperate I am to rise to the bait. And it's what I'm going to do. The only question is whether I take an even bigger gamble and I move Eze or Luis Diaz to that Man City midfielder for that game week 8 fixture against Wolves. And you know who it is that I want, and I know that you want me to get him, and it all depends on how the international break shakes down. But assuming no other issues present themselves in my team, and assuming that man is fit, then in game week 8 I think I'm going to take the chance. You've simply got to give the people what they want, and I know the people want me to bring in Savinho. And I'm going to give you my word that if Savinho is fit and there are no other issues in my team, then I will rise to the bait of black boxers and I will bring in Savinho, and I'll do it for you. But more importantly, I'll do it for me, because he is the right choice until that game week 12 wildcard. I believe in Savinho, perhaps even more than Savinho believes in Savinho, and I will show him that faith by backing him if he's fit. And that is the big lesson we should all be taking away from this video. The lesson is that FPL is not about hope, it's about faith. In these turbulent times, when the fear of missing out is monumental and the range of choices before us causes the seeds of doubt to grow, you simply have to be strong. You simply have to put your faith in your players for more than 1 or 2 game weeks. You have to have a plan, and you have to have that faith it'll work out. And the Gladiator had a plan, and he's executed it to almost perfection, and look where he is. But I believe I have a better plan, and it's that faith in this plan that gives me confidence. And indeed, had I not deviated from that plan by taking a hit to sell Jota for Diaz, I would be up there in second place, hot on the Gladiator's heels, and 400,000 places closer to the ultimate goal. I believe in my plan, and I believe in Savinho. And as long as Savinho stays fit, then together we're going to find out whether or not that faith in the lad is misplaced. And so ahead of game week 8, may all your transfers be successes, may all your arrows be green, and may those FPL gods be in your favour. Wrap Savinho in the cloak of protection by hitting that subscribe button, and we will see you next time.
It's an FPL Nightmare, got me pulling out more, yeah. I'm the greatest football manager to ever grace the old armchair, but the FPL gods hate me, and no one seems to care that my points are only average, and my ranking is not fair.